For King. I am still a hard man. Let's go. All right, so I'm going to try my best, if it allows me to. Hold on a second. There we go. All right. I will try my best to give a full eschatological explanation for prophecies in some of Daniel and Revelations by John. The title is Life in Light of the Prophecies of Daniel and Revelations by John of Patmos. The book of Daniel was written around 580 BC, not long after the Babylonian captivity of the southern kingdom of Judah. And King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had a dream about this giant statue, and none of his sages or none of his mystics could interpret what it represented. It was a lot like Pharaoh's dream in Genesis. And just like with Joseph, the prophet Daniel interpreted the dream to mean 4 kingdoms. 4 different kingdoms or whatnot. And so supposedly they represented Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And the feet, or the mix of the feet, which were a mixture of iron and clay, are supposed to represent the medieval successors of the Roman Empire. So anyways, over the years, there's been all sorts of rambling about what the prophecies of Daniel in chapters 7 and 11 actually represent. And today I'm going to try the best of my ability to perhaps shed some clear light. I'm just going to give you the straight dope. I'm going to give you the straight up answers of what they actually mean in light of what the church later said about these prophecies in the book of Daniel. And then the book of Revelations, there's some things about the rapture and the second coming of Christ, as well as the reign of the beast and of the Antichrist. So anyways, yeah, it's just going to be a mixture of this is just going to be basically just a mixture of different interpretations of these prophecies. I think that evangelicals and more fundamentalist Christians have made great exaggerations about what these prophecies actually mean, putting a lot more into them than what they actually mean or what they stand for. And so tonight, in this segment, Life in Light of the Prophecies of Daniel and Revelations, I'm going to try the best of my ability personally to talk about this. I covered life in the New Testament, where I gave you the basic fundamentals and I just glossed over the New Testament. And I'll go ahead and we'll talk about the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation in this. So Interdimensional Lizard says, morning, good morning, Interdimensional Lizard. Soulbreaker says, hail. Hail, Soulbreaker. What's up, man? Hello. Soulbreaker asks if you can mod my second channel just in case. Soul2Breaker2 says, hello. What's up, Soulbreaker2? Second, yeah, I gave you a mod. Nice painting, nice depiction of the 1821 Greek Revolution against the Ottomans. So anyways, I'll go ahead and get into this. We'll start with Daniel. I'm going to try to make sure this is not too long. I'll just give you a rundown on what I think Daniel and Revelations actually mean. We'll just jump into the meat here. So here we go. So this is newadvent.org. Daniel is the hero and traditional author of the book which bears his name. The name in Hebrew is Daniel or Daniel, in the Septuagint Daniel, which is also that of two other persons in the Old Testament, which means in Hebrew, God is my judge, and thus a fitting appellation for the writer of the book of Daniel, wherein God's judgments are repeatedly pronounced upon the Gentile powers. Nearly all that is known concerning the prophet Daniel is derived from the book ascribed to him. He belonged to the tribe of Judah and was of a noble and perhaps of even royal descent. Josephus and his Antiquities of the Jews are the chief reference. When still a youth, probably about 14 years of age, he was carried off to Babylon as a captive by Nebuchadnezzar in the 4th year of the reign of Joachim, 605 BC. There, with 3 other youths of equal rank named Ananias, Misael, and Azarias, he was entrusted to the care of Aspenaz, the master of the king's eunuchs, and was educated in the language and learning of the Chaldeans, whereby are meant the professors of divination, magic, and astrology in Babylon. From this passage, Jewish tradition has inferred that Daniel and his companions were made eunuchs. But this does not necessarily follow. The master of eunuchs simply trained these Jewish youths, among others, with a view of their entering into the king's service. Daniel now received his new name of Baltazar. Baltastu Usur, Bel protect his life, and in agreement with Ananias, Misael, and Azarias, who received similarly the new names of Sidrek, Misach, and Abednego, respectively, asked and obtained permission not to use the special food from the royal table provided to those under training, and to be limited to a vegetable diet. At the end of 3 years, Daniel and his companions appeared before the king, who found that they excelled all the others who had been educated with them, and thereupon promoted them to a place in his court. Henceforth, whenever the prince tested them, they proved superior to all the diviners and wise men that were in his kingdom. Daniel chapter 1, verses 7 to 20. Soon afterwards, either in the 2nd or the 12th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Daniel gave a signal proof of his marvelous wisdom. On the failure of all the other wise men at the court, he repeated and interpreted to the monarch's satisfaction the king's dream of a colossal statue, which was made up of various materials, and which, on being struck by a stone, was broken into pieces, while the stone grew into a mountain and filled the whole earth. On this account, Daniel in Babylon, as Joseph of old in Egypt, rose to high favor with the prince, who not only bestowed on him numerous gifts, but also made him ruler of the whole province of Babylon and chief governor of all the wise men. At Daniel's request, his three friends received important promotions. The next opportunity afforded Daniel to give proof of his wisdom with another dream of Nebuchadnezzar, which once more he alone was able to interpret. The dream was of a mighty tree concerning which the king heard the command given that it should be cut down, and that 7 times should pass over its stump, which had been left standing. This, explained Daniel, pretended that in punishment of his pride, the monarch would for a whole while lose his throne, be bereft of his reason, imagining himself an ox, and live in the open fields, to be again restored to his power, finally convinced of the supreme might and goodness of the Most High. With holy freedom, although in vain, the prophet exhorted the king to forestall such punishment by atoning for his sins by deeds of mercy. And Daniel's prediction was fulfilled to the letter. For a parallel of this, see Abydenus' account, 2nd century BC, quoted in Eusebius. All right, so that's a bit of Daniel. All right, so um, this is churchandtheology.org, the little horn and four earthly kingdoms of Daniel. And if it, okay, there we go. This is by George Dessoners. To understand the prophecy of the little horn, it is helpful to know a little about the four earthly kingdoms of Daniel. They are representatives of all the world powers between Neo Babylonia and the final world power, whatever it is, at the close of time. How many world powers will there be before the end? Nobody knows. The reason is that prophecy is commonly foreshortening. Prophecy often looks ahead to the next very important event and then places another very distant important event or the last days right behind it. Nevertheless, the language of the book of Daniel makes it plain that four real historical kingdoms were chosen by Daniel to represent all governmental powers. All right, so they are Babylon, Media, Persia, and Greece. An alternate scheme given by some commentators is that the four kingdoms are Babylon, Medo Persia, Greece, and Rome. The evidence is overwhelmingly against this alternate scheme, as we shall see. So the four kingdoms that Daniel was actually predicting were Babylon, then Media, then Persia, and finally Greece. Rome was actually not one of the four kingdoms, and I'll explain why. The prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah. First, the prophecies of Isaiah and Jeremiah tell us that the kingdom which overthrew Babylon was Media. Look at Isaiah chapter 13, verses 17 to 19, chapter 21, verses 1 to 9, and Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 11, and verses 28 to 29. Should anyone be surprised that Daniel is in agreement with Isaiah and Jeremiah? Do not regulate any of these prophecies to the junk heap. They are all telling us plainly that Medes were primarily among the armies gathered against Babylon when it fell. Those familiar with the fact that the empire of Medo-Persia overthrew Babylon need not worry. The facts make Daniel and Isaiah's and Jeremiah's treatment of the overthrow of Babylon very reasonable. Because of his religious training, Cyrus treated the conquered Medes very well, incorporating Media into his empire and allowing it to be Persia's most important province. Think of Media as a kingdom within a great power known as the Medes and the Persians. For the duality of this empire, see Esther chapter 1 verse 19, Daniel chapter 5 verse 28, chapter 6 verses 8, 12, and 15. Darius the Med, not Darius the Medo-Persian. Second, Daniel chapter 5 verse 31 says concerning the fall of Babylon that the kingdom was taken by Darius the Median. Historians have trouble identifying this Darius. Babylon is known to have been taken by the general Gabarius on behalf of Cyrus. Some people think, based upon a comparison of Daniel chapter 11 verse 1 in our Bibles with the same verse in the Septuagint, that there is even the possibility that Darius the Median was also Cyrus the Persian. In any case, Daniel has selected Media to be one of the four earthly kingdoms representing in much larger number. It is important that Daniel chapter 5 verse 31 says Darius the Med and not Darius the Medo-Persian. Rome is never mentioned in the book of Daniel. Rome is never mentioned by name in the book of Daniel. Babylon is mentioned by name 17 times. Media is mentioned 8 times. Persia is mentioned 11 times. Greece is mentioned 3 times. Rome is never named because nowhere in the book of Daniel, because nowhere in the book is Daniel talking specifically about Rome. To Daniel, Rome is merely one of several world powers represented by the four kingdoms he chose to use. The closest Daniel comes to mention of Rome is verse 1130, where it says, "For ships of Chittim will come against him. Therefore he will become disheartened, and will return and become enraged at the Holy Covenant." Historians think this is a reference to a city on the Isle of Cyprus, which came under the control of the Romans. The verse alludes to a dramatic incident in the career of Antiochus IV Epiphanes. While Antiochus was engaged in his second assault on the Ptolemaic kingdom, Popilius Linnaeus, a Roman naval leader, drew a circle on the ground around Antiochus and suggested that he not step outside it until he had thought well about whether he wanted to continue the war against Ptolemaic Egypt. Antiochus chose to go home. The second kingdom is inferior to Babylonia. Chapter 2, verse 39 makes it plain that gold and silver were selected to show the inferiority of the second kingdom compared with the first. Babylon, Media, was inferior to the Babylonian Empire in the normal ways. Superiority and inferiority would be understood. Media had been humbled by Persia, and at the time of the downfall of Babylon, was merely a kingdom within the empire of Medo-Persia. There is no credible way, however, in which Medo-Persia could be said to be inferior to Babylon. Medo-Persia had more than 10 times the land area. a much larger and well-organized population, and was vastly more powerful than the Babylonian Empire. People who believe the Second Kingdom is Medo-Persia sometimes offer peculiar notions in support of the idea that Medo-Persia was inferior to Babylon. One theory is that Daniel measures greatness by the extent of damage done to the Jews. Babylon did more damage to the Jews than Medo-Persia, and therefore was superior to Medo-Persia. Another theory is that Medo-Persia was inferior to Babylon because rule was necessarily less centralized and less absolute. In the very much larger Medo-Persian Empire, a third opinion is that Medo-Persia was morally inferior to Babylon. That last notion seems especially odd when one thinks of Cyrus freeing the Jews taken captive by Babylon, and of the way in which Babylon is used figuratively in the book of Revelation. None of these ideas are convincing, primarily because they stray too far from the normal ways in which the superiority and inferiority of kingdoms is understood. Persia, known for rule over all the kingdoms of the earth. Verse 239 makes clear that bronze was used to indicate the rule of the third kingdom all over the earth. This is a case of hyperbole, since no earthly kingdom has ruled over all the earth. Despite the hyperbole, the question remains whether this description is more appropriate for Greece or for Persia. While it is true that the Greek Empire at its peak was more extensive than the Persian, a more important point is that Cyrus is known from the Bible for claiming to have been given by God all the kingdoms of the earth. 2 Chronicles chapter 36 verse 23, Ezra chapter 1 verse 2. In addition, the famous Cyrus cylinder, which contains the records of Cyrus's reign, includes the statement that Babylon's chief god Marduk had accepted Cyrus as righteous prince and had appointed him ruler over the whole world. The point made here is that Persia, at least under Cyrus, was thought of this way. Greece wasn't. Accordingly, the third kingdom's rule all over the earth fits Persia better than Greece. Some who hold that the third kingdom is Greece mention that it was Greece that ruled over the whole earth, because Alexander cried over having no more worlds to conquer. The statement is often repeated, but is a known error of fact. After some very difficult battles near the Hephaestus River, Alexander's army mutinied and refused to fight any longer in India. Alexander confined himself to his tent for 3 days, sulking and hoping his soldiers would change their minds. They did not. Alexander's crying was not because there were no more worlds to conquer. It was because his army's mutiny defeated his plan to conquer India. Strength of iron describes Greece. Verse 240 tells us plainly that the iron in the statue indicates great strength. Those who think the fourth kingdom is Rome are correct in noting that Rome was known for its power and strength, the kind that crushes and shatters all things and breaks in pieces. However, the same verse describes Alexander's empire very well. Just ask the citizens of Tyre. Daniel's use of the great strength of iron to describe Greece was appropriate for another reason as well. Greece was a leading user of iron. No angel for Rome. Daniel chapter 10 makes no mention of an angel for Rome. in its report of the war in heaven. Daniel is using the popular belief that events in heaven parallel events on earth. In this war, there is an angel for Persia, 10:13-20, an angel for Greece, 10:20, and an angel for the Jews, 10:13-21. Consider the extra special treatment Daniel gives to the last of the earthly kingdoms mentioned in chapters 2 and 7. It is pretty difficult to imagine why there would be no mention for an angel for Rome if Rome was meant by the legs and feet of the image in chapter 2 and by the fourth beast in chapter 7. Lack of details of Roman history. In chapter 11, at least 33 verses are very accurately predict what was to become the history of the Greek Empire. If the fourth kingdom of chapters 2 and 7 were Rome, wouldn't there be at least a few verses accurately predicting its future so that we might recognize it? Why would God so accurately describe the third kingdom and say almost nothing of the fourth? Purpose of Daniel is better served if the fourth kingdom is Greece. The purpose of the book of Daniel is better served if the fourth kingdom were Greece than if it were Rome. The book, like Revelation, was meant to be a comfort to persecuted saints. Both of these books say, we may be suffering now, but we are on God's side, and God and us will win in the end. This is not to make a mere allegory out of Daniel. The book also had and has important things to say about real historical events. The book of Daniel was written during the persecution of the Jews by Antiochus the fourth Epiphanes. Daniel accurately describes important aspects of this persecution, such as the suspension for a time of the Jewish sacrifices and the profaning of the temple. See 1st and 2nd Maccabees. This persecution of the Jews was very severe, similar to the persecutions of Christians by Nero and Domitian. The book of Daniel would certainly not have been as powerful in inspiration to the Jews engaged in the Maccabean revolt against Antiochus if Greece was the third kingdom of Daniel rather than the fourth. Try to imagine yourself as one of the rebels, and the book of Daniel twice, once considering Greece to be the third kingdom, and once considering Greece to be the fourth. Which reading do you think would have been more inspiring to the rebels? There are patterns of truth and events that recur in history. As a result, prophecy sometimes has multiple fulfillments and a variety of applications. This can be seen in the case of Daniel. While the primary purpose of the book was undoubtedly to comfort the Jews who were suffering persecution under Antiochus, and to inspire the Jews during the Maccabean rebellion, other applications of certain truths in the book can be made. For instance, although Antiochus placing a statue of Zeus in the temple was one fulfillment of the abomination of desolation prophecy of Daniel chapter 11, verse 31, we all know from Jesus' statement in Matthew chapter 24, verse 15, that this prophecy would have another fulfillment. Other applications of the book of Daniel are sometimes made with respect to the first coming of Christ, and even to the end times. It should always be kept in mind, however, that the primary purpose of the prophecy was to deliver a meaningful message of comfort and inspiration to the author's own generation. The little horn of chapters 7 and 8 arises in the Greek or the Hellenic era. There is one of the keys to understanding Daniel. Realize that the prophet Daniel knows how to indicate a change in empire when he wants to. There is absolutely nothing in verses 8 to 9 to indicate that there is a change in empire, i.e., verse 8 refers to Greek rulers, but verse 9 to a Roman ruler. If one looks at chapter 8, verse 23, where the vision of the goat is explained, it says that the little horn will arise in the latter days of their rule, referring to the 4 lines of rulers started by the 4 generals who replaced Alexander the Great. Antiochus IV not only fits Daniel chapter 8 verse 9 and chapter 8 verse 23, but also fits precisely a large number of other verses in the book of Daniel, which nearly all commentators feel aptly to apply to the little horn of chapter 8. Some have supported the idea of an empire change between Daniel chapter 8 verse 8 and chapter 8 verse 9 by raising a grammatical point involving gender agreement. They say the word them in verse 9 is not in gender agreement with the word horn in verse 8, but rather with the word winds in verse number 8. However, even if those gender facts are correct, there is still no reason to suspect an empire change between the 2 verses. The issue of winds being the antecedent of them makes no difference. In verse 8, the 4 winds are associated with the 4 notable ones. Everyone agrees these 4 notable ones are the 4 Greek generals who agreed during a truce to divide Alexander's empire into 4 parts. The division was geographical in nature, and Daniel has described this division by saying in verse 8, "Come up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven." In verse 9, Daniel tells us it is from out of one of those 4 winds, which allude to the 4-part division of Alexander's empire, that the little horn comes. How does that force the conclusion that the little horn must be other than Greek? It is sad that this gender issue has been used effectively in leading some to believe that the little horn must be Roman. Once it is realized that the little horn of Daniel 8 is Greek, it is a simple matter to find that the little horn is the 4th kingdom of chapter 7, that the little horn of the 4th kingdom of chapter 7 is also Greek. Consider how implausible it would be for Daniel to use the same little horn metaphor in back-to-back accounts of 2 visions if the 2 little horns were different persons and perhaps different nationalities. To think of Daniel doing that is silly. If the little horn of chapter 8 is Greek, and chapter 8, verse 21 to 23 tells us he was, then the little horn of the 4th kingdom of chapter 7 is also Greek. So there is no mention of the Roman Empire in the book of Daniel. Little horns of chapter 7 and 8 are the same individual. In addition, it can be shown from an examination of details within chapters 7 and 8 that the 2 little horns are not only of the same nationality, but are the same individual. Daniel has said virtually the same things about little horn in the two chapters. In 7:8, we read, came up among them another little horn. In 8:9, it says, came forth a little horn. In 7:20, we read, before whom three fell. And in 7:24, he shall subdue three kings. In 8:9, it says, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. In 7:8:11:20:25, we read, a mouth speaking great things, great words which the horn spake, a mouth that spake very great things, and he shall speak great words against the Most High. Verses 8:11:25 says the same thing this way. Yeah, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and he shall also stand up against the prince of princes. Verse 7:20 says, whose look was more stout than his fellows. In 8:23 it says, a king of fierce countenance. In 7:21:25 we read, I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed them, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High. In verses 8, 10, 13, 24, it says, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. How long both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And it shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. Verse 7:25 says, to think to change times, and think to change times and laws. In 8:11 we read, by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. In 7:25 we read, and they shall be given into his hand until the time and times and the dividing of time. Verse 8:14 says, and he said unto me, unto 2,300 days. Margin notes suggest evenings and mornings in place of days. Verse 8:26 says, for it shall be for many days. In 7:11:22:26 we read, the beast was slain, and his body destroyed, and given to the burning flame, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume and to destroy it until the end. Verses 8:14 and 8:25 say, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed, but he shall be broken without hand. In 7:24 we read, and he shall be diverse from the first. This comment has no parallel in chapter 8, but in 11:24, a verse which is universally accepted as applying to the little horn of chapter 8, we read, he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. And in 11:37, a verse that many believe applies to the little horn of chapter 8, we read, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers. Summary. So to summarize, A, the four kingdoms of Daniel are Babylon, Media, Persia, and Greece. B, Daniel's treatment of the overthrow of Babylon agrees with Isaiah and Jeremiah. C, only four kingdoms are mentioned by name in the book of Daniel, and those four are named repeatedly: Babylon, Media, Persia, and Greece. D, Rome is never mentioned in the book of Daniel. because nowhere in the book of Dan is Dan in the book is Daniel speaking specifically about Rome. E. Verses 8 and 8 to 9 and 8:21 to 23 tell us the little horn of chapter 8 is Greek. F. The little horn of the fourth kingdom in chapter 7 is the same as the little horn of the fourth kingdom in chapter 7 is the same as the little horn of chapter 8. This confirms that the fourth kingdom of Daniel is Greece. G. Antiochus IV Epiphanes was a very important manifestation, even if not the ultimate manifestation of Daniel's little horn. So, the bottom line of what I'm trying to get at here is that Daniel is talking about Babylonia, Media, Persia, and then Alexander the Great's Greek Empire, and then its division by his generals into Ptolemaic ruled Egypt, Seleucid Syria, Antigonid Macedonia, and then another kingdom, I think it's Pergamum in Turkey, explained that about what the four parts of the statue of Nebuchadnezzar's dream actually means. Now I'm going to go to the book of Revelation. We're going to talk about the rapture and the second coming of Christ. And if you want to know why I'm not talking about the 70 weeks of Daniel, I haven't done enough research about the 70 weeks of Daniel to give a good explanation of that, so I'm not going to talk about it in this presentation. The 8 basic visions in the book of Revelation. This is by Kenneth A. Strand, Andrews University. The book of Revelation is a remarkably well-constructed literary piece, containing a multiplicity of neatly intertwining patterns. Such patterns are more than simply demonstrations of aesthetic taste and compositional skill, and they also transcend the useful purpose of serving in mnemonic devices. Indeed, in the forthright and forceful way, they highlight various aspects of the book's theological message. In broadest scope, the entire apocalypse is structured into an overall chiastic pattern in which prologue and epilogue are counterparts, and in which the intervening major prophetic sequences or visions are also paired in a chiastic or inverse order. This broad chiastic structure and its significance I have treated on several previous occasions, and they need no further elaboration for our purposes here, except to notice 2 specific features. 1, aside from the prologue and epilogue, there are 8 major prophetic sequences, 4 that precede and 4 that follow a line drawn between chapters 14, 15. 2, the visions preceding the chiastic dividing line have basically an historical perspective. That is, they relate to the Christian era, and the visions after the chiastic dividing line depict the eschatological judgment era. With respect to the first item above, it should be emphasized that there are indeed 8 major prophetic sequences in the apocalypse, not 7 as various interpreters have assumed. So this is diagram 1, the chiastic structure of the book of Revelation. Concerning the second item, several qualifications should be noted. In the second through fourth visions, each historical sequence concludes with a section that portrays the time of eschatological judgment, and in the subsequent visions, which in their essence furnish an enlargement on that eschatological judgment era, there are two kinds of material that pertain to the historical era: explanations which must obviously be made in terms of the prophet's own perspective in history, and exhortations or appeals which have value only prior to the eschatological judgment, and which would of course be meaningless at the time of the final eschatological judgment itself. Eschatological judgment itself. These qualifications concerning exceptions to the main thrust or coverage of the visions on each side of the chiastic dividing line should not, however, be considered as crossover materials. These data are important parts of their own sequences, are in proper position as they stand, and speak significantly to the context in which they are found. Moreover, they are discrete and meaningful units to a nature, placement, and our purpose within their own specific visions. For convenience, the comprehensive chiastic structure of Revelation into prologue, epilogue, and 8 visions is set forth in outline form in diagram 1, which includes also my suggestions as to the textual boundaries and general topics of the various visions. In this diagram and throughout the remainder of the discussion in this article, the term visions will refer to these 8 complete prophetic sequences, not to individual visionary experiences of lesser extent. Also, Roman numerals will be used to identify the visions in sequence. The present study has 2 main purposes, and the data pertaining to each of these will be presented in separate articles. First, the present essay analyzes briefly some parallel patterns in the 8 major visions of the book of Revelation. Then a follow-up article will focus a bit more intensively on the particular blocks of the text that introduce these 8 visions, and which can be designated as victorious introduction scenes, inasmuch as they provide for each vision a setting which portrays a dramatic fashion God's present care for his people, and gives assurance of ultimate victory for Christ's saints or loyal ones. For purposes of identification in the present article, Roman numerals 1 and 2, etc., will continue to be used as in diagram 1 for designating the 8 visions. Each vision, however, has either 2 or more main sections or blocks of the text, and capital letters A, B, etc. will serve as identifiers for these. Diagram 2, paralleling structures in Revelation, Revelation's 8 major visions. So, are you ready to jump into this? All right. An analysis of the patterns within the 8 visions. The first and the final visions, 1 and 8, of the Apocalypse are composed of the victorious introduction scene, A, plus 1 further main block of text, B, that may be called the basic prophetic description. The other 6 visions, 2 to 7, have these same 2 blocks, but with the addition of 2 further blocks, C and D. In this essay, the third blocks of text in the second through seventh visions are throughout given the basic caption of interlode, a term quite regularly applied to the exegetes of for these particular sections in visions 2, 3, and 4, but equally applicable to the corresponding but much shorter sections in visions 5, 6, and 7. It should be noted, however, that although the term interlode frequently suggests an interruption to or hiatus within the flow of thought, what these third blocks of material do in visions 2 to 7 of the Apocalypse is to enhance or intensify the thrust of the immediately preceding material. The fourth block can be designated as the eschatological culmination, and in a certain sense, both it and the preceding interlode are actually an extension of the basic prophetic description begun in the second block. Although it will be necessary later in this article to add certain further refinements to the foregoing basic analysis, at this point we may summarize in diagram form the results reached thus far. Such a summary is provided in diagram 2. 2. Summary of the contents of the visions. At this juncture, it is useful to take an overview of the content of each of the 8 visions. The summaries given here follow the broad lines of structure indicated above. It should be emphasized that these are indeed summaries, and the reader can fill in details by consulting the text indicated for each of the visions. The historical visions. Vision 1, Block A, victorious introduction scene. Christ appears to John on Patmos as the ever-living and all-powerful one who walks among the 7 golden candlesticks that represent the 7 churches. Block B, basic prophetic description. Chapters 2 and 3. Christ gives messages of praise, rebuke, warning, and exhortation to the individual churches as their varying conditions require. Vision 2, Block A, victorious introduction scene, chapters 4 and 5. John sees a throne set in heaven with a sea of glass and 7 lamps of fire before the throne, and with 4 living creatures and 24 elders surrounding the throne. In a dramatic and suspenseful scene, the declaration is made that the slain lamb alone is able to take from the hand of the one sealed on the throne a 7-sealed scroll, and to break the seals and open the scroll. The lamb then takes the scroll, and anthems of praise ascend from the 4 living creatures, the 24 elders, and the entire universe. Block B, basic prophetic descriptions, chapter 6. The first 6 seals of the scroll are broken, and the result that 4 horsemen go forth. Souls under the altar utter a cry of how long until there is judgment and vindication for them, and signs are given on earth and in heaven of impending judgment. Block C, Interlode, chapter 7. The sequence is interrupted to focus on the sealing of 144,000 during the end time. Block D, Eschatological culmination, chapter 8, verse 1. The 7th seal is opened, at which there is silence in heaven for the duration of half an hour. Vision 3, Block A, the victorious introduction scene. 7 angels with trumpets appear, and another angel goes to the golden altar, and there offers incense whose smoke, mingled with the prayers of the saints, ascends to God. Next, the angel fills a censer with live coals from the altar and throws this upon the earth, resulting in the judgment symbols of voices, thunder, lightning, and earthquake. Block B, basic prophetic description. The first 6 trumpets are blown, releasing forces of devastation that embrace the symbolisms of a storm of hell upon the earth, a great burning mountain thrown into the sea, etc. The first 5 of these trumpets draw imagery from the plagues on ancient Egypt, but the 6th trumpet shifts the background to Babylon, to mention of the great river Euphrates in chapter 9, verse 14. Block C, interlude. An angel holding an open scroll announces that there should be time no longer, or has alternatively translated, there should be no more delay. John is commanded to eat the scroll and does so, finding it sweet in his mouth but bitter in his stomach. The prophet is then instructed to measure the temple, altar, and people, a direct allusion, as I have shown elsewhere, to the year end Day of Atonement ritual in the ancient Jewish cultus. And the testimony and career of the 2 witnesses are described. Block D, eschatological culmination. The 7th trumpet is blown, resulting in the announcement that the kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and his Christ. And then an anthem of praise arises, emphasizing, among other things, that the time has come for judgment of the dead, for rewarding the saints, and for destroying the destroyers of the earth. Vision 4, Block A, victorious introduction scene, chapter 11, verse 19. God's temple in heaven was opened, making visible the ark of his covenant. Then flashes of lightning, voices, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and heavy hail occur. Block B, basic prophetic description, chapters 12 and 13. The dragon, leopard-like sea beast, and then 2 horned earth beasts persecute God's people. Block C, interlude, chapter 14, verses 1 to 13. John sees 1, the Lamb, and the 144,000 victorious saints standing on Mount Zion, and 2, 3 angels flying in heaven and proclaiming warning messages. Block D, eschatological culmination. Earth's 2-fold harvest is reaped. 1, the harvest of grain, and 2, the grapes that are thrown into the great winepress of God's wrath. The eschatological judgment visions. Vision 5, Block A, victorious introduction scene. The victorious saints stand on the sea of glass and sing the song of Moses and the Lamb. And then the temple of the tent of witness in heaven is opened. 7 angels come forth and receive 7 bowls, bowls full of the wrath of God. Smoke fills the temple so that no one can enter till the plagues of the 7 angels have been completed. And finally, instruction is given to the angels to go their ways and pour out the bowls. Block B, basic prophetic description. The first 6 bowls of wrath are poured out with devastating effects on earth, sea, rivers, and fountains, etc. Again, has in the trumpets septent. Imagery for the first 5 bowls is patterned after the plagues on ancient Egypt, with the scene shifting to Babylon as the 6th bowl refers to the great river Euphrates in chapter 6, verse 12. Block C, interlude. Into the description of the 6th bowl, the drying up of the Euphrates, and the presence of demonic spirits that deceive the kings of the earth and lead them to the battle of the great day of God the Almighty. Chapter 16, verses 12 through 14. Is inserted a striking markerism in verse 15. Lo, I, Christ, am coming like a thief. Blessed is he who is awake. Then follows an added comment to the effect that the place of the battle is called Armageddon. Verse 16. Since we have now moved into the section of the Apocalypse that provides visions of the eschatological judgment rather than pertaining to the historical era, it is obvious that a new sort of interlude can be expected, as is indeed the case here. The earlier interludes were somewhat detailed descriptions of events or conditions during a final portion of the historical era. The interludes that occur in visions 5 through 7 are rather of a crisp, hortatory nature. The question may be asked, why such interludes here? For this particular one in Revelation chapter 16, verse 15, Paul S. Manier has aptly pointed out, the saying reveals the terrible danger in which the unsuspecting Christian stands. If one asks with R.H. Charles, how could anyone sleep through the cosmic earthquakes which were happening? One may answer, that is just the point. There were Christians asleep, so John believed, quite undisturbed by din of doom, unaware that anything was happening that could threaten their treasure or leave them exposed and naked. To be asleep was to be unconscious of the urgent necessity of the time. Compare the disciples in Gethsemane, Matthew chapter 14, verse 26 to 42. The beatitude was designed for sentinels who had forgotten that a war was being fought. Block D, eschatological culmination. The traditional signs of judgment occur: voices, thunder, lightning, earthquake, and hail, and great Babylon comes into judgmental remembrance before God. John is then taken into the wilderness to see this judgment upon Babylon. Block B. Basic, okay. The seventh seal, the seventh bowl of wrath is poured out, and there issues from the throne in the temple in heaven the declaration, "It is done." Vision 6. Block A. Victorious introduction scene. The traditional signs of judgment occur: voices, thunder, lightning, earthquake, and hell. And great Babylon comes into judgmental remembrance before God. John is then taken into the wilderness to see this judgment upon Babylon. Block B. Basic prophetic description. A description of Babylon has a harlot, and also of the seven-headed and ten-horned scarlet-colored beast, upon which she rides, is introduced in the early verses of chapter 17. This descriptive scene is followed by considerable explanatory detail, verses 9 to 18, that culminates in a reference to the devastation of the harlot by the beast's 10 horns, verses 16 to 17, and the identification of this harlot as the great city that rules over earth's kings, verse 18. In the first three verses of chapter 18, a recital of various aspects of Babylon's corruption sets the stage for the interlude, appeal, and the description of destruction that follow. Block C. Interlude. Before the actual portrayal of Babylon's devastation through fire, an appeal is made for God's people to come out of Babylon, so that they do not become participants in her sins and recipients of her plagues. In this connection, there is also a reiteration in elaborated form of God's decree of judgment against Babylon, inasmuch as in the chiastic structure of the material in chapter 18, verse 20, is a chiastic counterpart into verses 4 to 8. Both of these interludes within this particular chiasm should probably be considered as the total interlude for the larger sequence from chapter 17, 3b to 18:24, verses 20, gives a call for rejoicing over the fact that God has proclaimed against Babylon herself the judgment which she had imposed upon God's people. Block D. Eschatological culmination. The central section of chapter 18, verses 9 to 19, portrays, through a threefold dirge, Babylon's utter desolation by fire, and the final section of the chapter, verses 21 to 24, emphasizes Babylon's doom and her utterly desolate condition after God's judgment upon her. Vision 7, Block A, victorious introduction scene. In a heavenly setting that parallels the setting given in chapter 4, anthems arise in praise of God for his having judged the great harlot Babylon and vindicated God's people. Then reference is made to the Lamb's bride being ready for the wedding, and a blessing is pronounced upon those who are invited to the marriage supper of the Lamb. It should be noted that through the heavenly temple setting of chapters 4 through 5 and chapter 19 is the same. There is difference with respect to activity and perspective, a fact also made clear by the content of the anthems in the two visions. The former vision pertains clearly to the historical era, and this one pertains just as clearly to the era of eschatological judgment. Block B, basic prophetic description. Christ's second advent is dramatically portrayed, and consequences of it are given. Among the negative results enumerated are the bird's feast consisting of the enemies of God. The lake The negative results enumerated are the bird's feast consisting of the enemies of God, the lake of fire fate for the beast and false prophet, and the imprisonment of Satan to the bottomless pit or abyss for 1,000 years. On the positive side is the first resurrection, in which the martyred saints arise. They then live and reign with Christ for 1,000 years. Interlude. Blessed and holy is he who shares in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power. Block D. Eschatological culmination. The culminating events at the end of the 1,000 years are set forth. On the negative side are the loosing of Satan, the resurgence of his deceptive work, the vain effort of his evil confederacy to capture the camp of the saints, and the final fiery destruction of this confederacy. On the positive side is John's vision of a new heaven and a new earth, with the holy city, New Jerusalem, descending from heaven to earth, and God himself tabernacling with his people. Vision 8, Block A, victorious introduction scene. The proclamation is made that Christ's victorious ones will inherit all things. And John sees the holy city, New Jerusalem, descend from heaven to earth. Has a backdrop. The final section of the preceding vision has already portrayed the condition on earth after the descent of the New Jerusalem. Block B, basic prophetic description. The holy city, New Jerusalem, is described in detail. All right. Further analysis of text blocks A, B, C, and D. With the foregoing background, we may now proceed to some further generalizations concerning the nature of the respective sections A, B, etc. within the 8 visions. Also, we can suggest additional notations for the captions of these blocks of text, beyond what has already been indicated in the earlier sections of this article and in diagram 2. As we consider the victorious introduction scene for each of the 8 visions, we find that there is always a basic temple setting and our temple imagery background of some sort. Therefore, our caption of victorious introduction scene, block A, can be supplemented with the phrase, with temple setting. As for the second through fourth blocks of text, blocks B, C, and D, a difference in perspective should be noted between the visions preceding the chiastic dividing line, visions 1 and 4, and the visions following, visions 5 and 8. With respect to the former, the basic prophetic description is within the historical arena. With respect to the latter, the basic vision material in the B blocks pertain to the eschatological or final judgment. For visions 1 through 4, therefore, the basic prophetic description needs the added qualification in history, and for visions 8 through 8, 5 through 8, That qualification would be in final judgment in passing. Final judgment in passing. As for the third blocks of text C in visions 2 to 4, the basic designation of interlude may likewise be supplemented with an additional phrase, spotlight on last events, meaning prior to Christ's second advent, inasmuch as the interlude in each instance enlarges on the period of time just before the eschatological culmination. For visions 1 to 7, the added phrase, exhortation or appeal, is appropriate. For the terrors of the final judgment scenes are interrupted in order to give short blocks of text setting forth encouragement to faithfulness and are appeals to repentance. In two of these instances of exhortation or appeal, the interlude is cast, as we have already seen, basically in the form of markerism. Chapter 15, chapter 16, verse 15, and chapter 20, verse 4. The sections on eschatological culmination, the D blocks, all pertain to the final eschatological consummation. As noted earlier, but those concluding sections for visions 2 to 4 provide a climactic conclusion to series that relate to the historical era, whereas those for visions 5 to 7 deal specifically with the final or terminating portion of eschatological judgment series already in progress in the earlier sections of those visions. Blocks D for visions 2 to 4 may therefore be designated as eschatological culmination climax to history, and the D blocks for visions 5 to 7 may be termed eschatological culmination, the judgmental finale. Diagram 3 on the next page incorporates the above mentioned refinements to the data given in diagram 2, and also includes my suggestions as to the textual boundaries for the blocks of material as set forth in the second section of the present article. Diagram 3, overview of structure and content of the apocalypse. This is historical era visions. This is eschatological judgment era visions. So, in the chiastic structure of the book of Revelation, the church militant, church on earth, the seven churches, God's ongoing work of salvation, trumpet warnings, the seven trumpets, evil powers opposing God and his saints, Exodus and fall of Babylon motif, bowl plagues, the seven last plagues, evil powers judged by God, Exodus, fall of Babylon motif, God's judgment finale, Christ's second advent, the millennium, the white throne judgment, church triumphant, new heaven and new earth, holy city, new Jerusalem. We've diagrammed 2, basically the same thing as what I've already covered. Conclusion. In this article, we have observed that there is a basic, consistent, and balanced literary structure in the book of Revelation. This structure not only has aesthetic and mnemonic values or qualities, but also speaks significantly to the theological message of the book. Various aspects of the theology will be dealt with in a follow-up article that will explore in further detail the victorious introduction scenes to the 8 visions, but one significant theological focus may be mentioned here. The broad chiastic structure itself emphasizes a twofold theme that embraces and undergirds the various messages of the book. One, that Christ is both Alpha and Omega, and number two, that he will return at the end of the age to reward all persons according to their works. Revelation chapter 1, verse 7 to 8, chapter 22, verse 12 to 13. In other words, he is a consistent, trustworthy, and ever present help and support to his faithful ones during this historical era of adversity. For them, Revelation chapter 1, verse 17 to 18, Matthew chapter 28, verse 20, John chapter 16, verse 33, Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2, chapter 13, verse 8, and he will personally return to usher in a series of events that destroy the destroyers of the earth and that provide to his loyal followers the inheritance of the new earth and the fulfillment of all the good promises made to them. Revelation chapter 11, verses 15 to 18, chapter 21, verses 1 to 4 and 7, chapter 22, verses 22 to 27, and chapter 22, verses 1 to 5. The 4 prophetic sequences preceding the chiastic dividing line deal primarily with the first aspects, and the 4 major visions subsequent to that dividing line are devoted mainly to the second aspect. In closing, one further item may also be briefly introduced here. It is noteworthy that in the introductory scenes of the 8 visions, the temple imagery reveals a pattern of first an earthly venue in Vision 1, candlesticks that represent churches on earth, followed by a heavenly venue in Visions 2 to 7, either an explicit mention of the temple in heaven or its furniture, and or B, a background that indicates this heavenly setting, and followed finally by a return again to an earthly venue in Vision 8, God tabernacling in the new earth / New Jerusalem. Chief reference chapter 21 verse 3 and verse 22. This is a striking phenomenon whose theological significance and whose correlation, which emphasizes in general New Testament theology, will be set forth in the subsequent article in this series. And so that is kind of something to give you a good chief reference in regards to prophecies in the book of Revelation. Now, I want to talk about 5 myths about the rapture. CatholicCulture.org is the site where I found this. 5 myths about the rapture. Three years ago, I mentioned to a Catholic friend that I was starting to work on a book critiquing the Left Behind novels. I explained that it would thoroughly examine premillennial dispensationalism, the unique apocalyptic belief system presented in fictional format within those books. Premillennial dispensationalism teaches that the rapture and the second coming are 2 events separated by a time of tribulation, and that there will be a future millennial reign of Christ on earth. Why? She asked, obviously bewildered. No one really takes that stuff seriously. The revealing remark merely reinforced my desire to write Will Catholics Be Left Behind? Ignatius 2003. Other conversations brought home the same point. Far too many people, including a significant number of Catholics, don't recognize the attraction and power of this fundamentalist phenomenon, nor do they appear to appreciate how much curiosity exists about the end times, the book of Revelation, and the pre tribulation rapture. The belief that Christians will be taken up from earth prior to a time of tribulation and the second coming. So there is a first resurrection. Code of Truth asks a very vulgar question. Do you practice semen retention at Imperator of Forge? And I am not going to answer that in the context of this stream. Soulbreaker says when Soulbreaker says burgers. And this weirdo says big banks from Big Bangers, Little Lord Lazarus Iscariot Jr. Yeah, whatever, dude. Myth number 1. The Left Behind book represents a fringe belief system that very few people take seriously. Exactly how many copies of the Left Behind book must be sold before the theology they propagate can be taken seriously? 57 million. That's actually where sales stand as I write this. Making the novels consisting now of 11 books and supposedly ending with book 14, the biggest selling series of Christian fiction ever. Then there are 2 movies, CDs, children's books, devotionals, greeting cards, and a host of other products, along with a website that attracts hundreds of thousands of fans every month. But that's only part of the larger picture. The biggest selling work of nonfiction other than the Bible since 1970 is dispensationalist Hale Lindsey's The Late Great Planet Earth, Bantam 1970, which sold more than 40 million copies and established the blueprint for a number of other popular self-described Bible prophecy experts, including Tim LaHaye, creator and co-author of the Left Behind series. LaHaye's first work of Bible prophecy was The Beginning of the End, Tyndale 1972, essentially a carbon copy of Lindsey's megaseller. In the years that followed, Lindsey and LaHaye, along with authors such as Salem Kurban, David Wilkinson, Dave Hunt, Grant Jeffrey, John Walvoord, and others, produced a string of best-selling books warning of the rapidly approaching pre-tribulation rapture, the Antichrist, and the tribulation. The success of these books and of the dispensationalist system isn't fringe. Far from it. They're actually quite mainstream, influencing even nominal Christians and non-Christians. It reflects a trend that has been steadily growing for several decades. While Lutherans, Methodists, and Episcopalians dwindle in number and influence, fundamentalist and conservative evangelical groups continue to form and grow vigorously, making their mark increasingly in the secular realm. Many of these fundamentalists, including non-denominational Christians, Bible-believing Christians, born-again Christians, Baptist and Assembly of God members, are antagonistic toward the Catholic Church and her teachings. and a majority of them believe in some form of dispensationalism. Harvard historian Paul Boyer, author of When Time Shall Be No More, Prophecy Belief in Modern American Culture, Harvard University Press, 1998, estimates that 30 or 40% of Americans believe in Bible prophecy and hold to eschatological beliefs such as those taught in the Left Behind novels. Admittedly, such numbers are difficult, if not impossible, to verify with any real accuracy. Still, it can be safely said that tens of millions of Americans believe in a pre-tribulation rapture and would readily accept the Left Behind books as a fairly accurate, fictionalized depiction of the fast approaching end of the world. So be careful with being taken up into this kind of fatalism, this kind of end times fatalism. Myth number two: Catholic beliefs about the end times are quite similar to those of fundamentalists such as Tim LaHaye. Studying dispensationalism, as in studying almost any theological system, is like exploring an iceberg. The vast majority lies beneath the surface, out of sight, and unnoticed by the casual observer. On the surface, dispensationalists and Catholics appear to agree about the second coming, a future Antichrist, and an impending trial and time of apostasy. And in fact, common beliefs about aspects of these teachings do exist. Although it comes as a surprise to many fundamentalists, the Catholic Church clearly believes in the second coming, a final trial, and a supreme religious deception of the Antichrist. As noteworthy as these agreements are, the differences between premillennial dispensationalism and Catholic doctrine are even more striking. Stripped of their bare essentials, these include three premises about the past and present and two beliefs about the future. The first dispensationalist premise is that Jesus Christ failed to establish the kingdom for the Jews during his first coming. Dispensationalists believe that Christ offered a material and earthly kingdom, but the Jews rejected him. John Nelson Darby, 1800 to 1882, the ex-Anglican priest who formed the dispensationalist system, wrote, "The Lord, having been rejected by the Jewish people, is become wholly a heavenly person." This dualistic notion was echoed and articulated by Darby's disciples, including Cyrus I. Scofield, editor of the Scofield Reference Bible, Louis Sperry Schaeffer, and many of the popularizers of this system. Leading dispensationalist theologian Charles C. Ryrie, in his Systematic Basic Theology, gives this convoluted explanation. Throughout his earthly ministry, Jesus' Davidic kingship was offered to Israel. Matthew chapter 2 verse 2 and chapter 27 verse 11, John chapter 12 verse 13. But he was rejected because the king was rejected. The messianic Davidic kingdom was, and from a human viewpoint, postponed. Though he never ceases to be king, and of course, has king today, has always, Christ is never designated as king of the church. Though Christ is a king today, he does not rule as king. He awaits his second coming. then the Davidic kingdom will be realized. Matthew chapter 25, verse 31, Revelation chapter 19, verse 15 and verse 20. This supposed failure leads to the second promise that the church is a parenthetical insert into history. Put another way, the church was created out of necessity when the Jews rejected Christ. Louis Sperry Schaeffer, 1871 to 1952, whose 8-volume systematic theology is the dispensationalist Summa, wrote, "The present age of the church is an intercalation into the revealed calendar or program of God, so that that program was foreseen by the prophets of old. Such indeed is the precise nature of the present age. The church is not, in dispensationalist theology, the new Israel spoken of by St. Paul. See Galatians chapter 6, verse 16. But is utterly separate from Old Testament Israel. So long as the church age continues, the Old Testament promises made to Israel are on hold, waiting to be fulfilled. The third promise, so vital to dispensationalism, is the existence of two people of God, the Jews, the earthly people, and the Christians, the heavenly people. This is the language and theological vision established by Darby and taken up by leading dispensationalists ever since. In Rapture Under Attack, Multnomah, 1998, LaHaye notes that the pre-tribulational dispensationalist view is the only view that distinguishes between Israel and the church, and then remarks that the confusion of Israel and the church is one of the major reasons for confusion in prophecy as a whole. Pre-tribulationism is the only position which clearly outlines the program of the church. As LaHaye's statement indicates, these premises result in the belief of the pre-tribulation rapture. This event is necessary because the heavenly people, Christians, must eventually be taken from the earthly stage so that the prophetic timeline can be restarted and God's work with the earthly people, Jews, resumed. That work will involve 7 years of tribulation, which dispensationalists believe will be a period of God's chastisement on the Jewish people, resulting in the vast majority of Jews being killed, but also in the conversion of those remaining. This finally leads to the second belief about the future, an earthly millennial kingdom established by Christ for the Jews, based on passages such as Revelation 20 and Ezekiel 40 to 68. Ezekiel chapters 40 to 48. This includes the claim that animal sacrifices will be renewed in a rebuilt temple. Some dispensationalists think that these sacrifices will be symbolic. Others believe that they will have salvific value, befitting a theocratic government. All 5 of these points are incompatible with Catholic doctrine. Christ did not offer an earthly kingdom, nor did he fail nor was he rejected by all of the Jews. His mother, the apostles, and the disciples were all Jews who accepted him as the Messiah. The church is not a sort of plan B. That is, according to the Catechism, the goal of all things reflecting the Catholic recognition of how intimately Christ has joined himself to the church. Chief reference Ephesians chapter 5. The old covenant is fulfilled in the new, and there is only one people of God of the new covenant, which transcends all the natural or human limits of nations, cultures, races, and sexes. For by one Spirit we are all baptized into one body. CCC 1267. Catechism 1267. Flowing from incorrect, flawed premises, the idea of a pre-tribulation rapture is foreign to Catholic theology, based largely on St. Augustine's City of God. The millennium has long been understood, if not formally defined, to be the church age, a time when the king rules even though the kingdom has not been fully revealed. The Catechism 567 and 669. Myth number 3. The rapture is a biblical and orthodox belief. LaHaye declares in Rapture Under Attack that virtually all Christians who take the Bible literally expect to be raptured before the Lord comes in power to this earth. This would have been news to Christians, both Catholic and Protestant, living prior to the 18th century, since the concept of a pre-tribulation rapture was unheard of prior to that time. Vague notions had been considered by the Puritan Preacher's Increase, 1639 to 1723, and Cotton Mather, 1663 to 1728, and the late 18th century Baptist minister Morgan Edwards. But it was John Nelson Darby who solidified the belief in the 1830s and placed it into a larger theological framework. This historical background leaves the dispensationalist with two options: claim the pre-tribulation rapture is biblical, but went undiscovered for 1,800 years, or argue that it has been the belief of true Christians ever since Christ walked the earth. Ryrie, in his apologetic Dispensationalism Today, Moody, 1965, makes a case for the former by stating, the fact that the church taught something in the first century does not make it true. And likewise, if the church did not teach something until the 20th century, it is not necessarily false. LaHaye and others argue for the latter, pointing to passages such as 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verses 15 to 18, 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verses 51 to 53, and Matthew chapter 24 has clear evidence for the pre-tribulation rapture. Those passages make several appearances, for instance, in the Left Behind novels. So, do you guys realize how absolutely nonsensical that actually is? First Thessalonians chapter 4 verses 16 to 17 is especially vital to the dispensationalist. For the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a cry of command, with the archangel's call, and with the sound of the trumpet of God. And the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, shall be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So we shall always be with the Lord. There are three problems with claiming this passage refers to the rapture. First, neither it nor the entire book of First Thessalonians mentions Christ returning two more times, or makes any reference to such a distinction. Second, dispensationalists believe the rapture will be a secret and silent event. Yet this passage describes a very loud and public event. This is all the more problematic because dispensationalists insist that they will interpret Scripture plainly and literally, allowing for symbolism only when such is the obvious intent of the author. Finally, dispensationalists teach that all other New Testament references to Christ coming in the clouds, Matthew chapter 24 verse 30 and chapter 26 verse 64, Mark chapter 14 verse 62, Revelation chapter 1 verse 7 refer to his second coming, but inexplicably deny that that is the case here. First Corinthians chapter 15 and its reference to the twinkling of an eye is often used as a proof text, but is equally unconvincing. The point of the passage is that Christians will be glorified at the second coming, not that they'll be secretly whisked off the planet prior to the tribulation. It describes an event that will occur at the last trumpet and states that the trumpet will sound and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed. First Corinthians chapter 15 verse 52. Yet LaHaye and left behind co-authors Jerry B. Jenkins, reflecting the common dispensationalist interpretation, claim in Are We Living in the End Times, Tyndale 1999, that Matthew chapter 24 verse 29 to 31 describes the second coming, which will include a great sound of a trumpet. Matthew chapter 24 verse 31. So how can 1 Corinthians chapter 15, which speaks of the last trumpet, refer to the rapture when there is yet another trumpet to be sounded several years later at the second coming? Some dispensationalists have admitted, at least in a backhanded fashion, the recent roots of the pre-tribulation rapture. In an article titled The Origin of the Pre-Trib Rapture, Biblical Perspectives, March-April 1989, LaHaye's colleague at the Pre-Trib Research Institute, Thomas D. Ice, writes that a certain theological climate needed to be created before premillennialism would restore the biblical doctrine of the pre-trib rapture. He continues, sufficient development did not take place until after the French Revolution. The factor of the rapture has been clearly known by the church all along. Therefore, the issue is the timing of the event, since neither pre nor post-tribs have a proof text for the time of the rapture. Then it is clear that this issue is the product of a deduction from one's overall system of theology, both for pre and post-tribbers. In fact, the rapture, as dispensationalists conceive of it, was never part of the earthly nor medieval church's theology, but is the modern creation of Darby less than 200 years ago. So there is not going to be a pre-tribulation nor a post-tribulation rapture. That myth number 4. The early church fathers believed in the rapture and the millennial kingdom on earth. This clever argument used by Ryrie, LaHaye, Lindsay, and others is effective in persuading those with little knowledge of historical theology or the beliefs of the early church. True, several early Christian writers, notably Papias, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Tertullian, Hippolytus, Methodius, Commodanius, and Lactantius, were premillennialists who believed that Christ's second coming would lead to a visible earthly reign. But the premillennialism they embraced was quite different from that taught by modern dispensationalists. Catholic scholars acknowledge that some of the fathers were influenced by the Jewish belief in an earthly messianic kingdom, while others embraced millenarianism as a reaction to the Gnostic antagonism toward the material realm. But the Catholic Church does not look to one church father in isolation, or even a select group of fathers, and claim their teachings as infallible or definitive. Rather, the Church views their writings as valuable guides, providing insights and perspectives that assist the magisterium, the teaching office of the Church, in defining, clarifying, and defending church doctrine. Those early premillennialists did not hold to distinctively modern and dispensationalist beliefs, especially not the belief of a pre tribulation rapture and the radical distinction between an earthly and a heavenly people of God. Such beliefs didn't come about until many centuries later. The early church fathers, whether premillennialists or otherwise, believed that the church was the new Israel and that Christians, consisting of both Jews who accepted Christ as the Messiah and Gentiles, chief reference Romans chapter 10 verse 12, had replaced the Jews as God's chosen people. In attempting to prove the validity of their beliefs by appealing to early church fathers, dispensationalists always ignore the church fathers' unanimous teachings about the nature of the Eucharist, the authority and nature of the church, and a host of other distinctively Catholic beliefs. They also conveniently blur the lines between the historical premillennialism of certain early church writers and the dispensational premillennialism of Darby and his disciples. And by the way, before I continue, I mean Jews that accepted Christ as their Savior, along with Gentiles who converted to Christianity, and not necessarily Christ has a Davidic Messiah. I just wanted to make that clear. Myth number 5. The Left Behind books are harmless entertainment that encourage Christians in their faith and help them better understand the book of Revelation. Even when presented with the faulty theological premises underlying dispensationalism, some Catholics still insist that the Left Behind series is just good fun, a light read with a sound moral message. Some, however, go even further and claim the books have changed their lives, provided answers about the end of the world, and made sense of the Bible, particularly the book of Revelation. Responding to my book, a Catholic reader wrote, I personally believe that the dispensationalists have done Catholics a favor by alerting them to the serious times we live in and by encouraging them to search out the scriptures. She never makes mention of Catholic scholarship or magisterial documents. Another Catholic reader of the series told me, you condemn these books because they're successful. In fact, I've strongly critiqued the Left Behind books because they're written by a noted fundamentalist with serious animus toward the Catholic Church in order to propagate a theology that is incorrect, misleading, and contrary to historic Christianity or Christology. One message of LaHaye's that comes across clearly in books such as Are We Living in the End Times, Rapture Under Attack, and Revelation Unveiled is that the Catholic Church is apostate. Catholicism is Babylonian mysticism and an idolatrous religion, and Catholics worship Mary, knowing little about the real Jesus Christ. It's difficult to understate the dislike, even hatred LaHaye has for the Catholic Church, or to exaggerate the ridiculous character of his attacks. He condemns the use of candles in Catholic churches, insists there's hardly any difference between Hinduism and Catholicism, and emphatically declares that the Catholic Church killed at least 40 million people during the Dark Ages. When I asked LaHaye via email why he never refers to Catholic sources or official documents in his writings, he replied, because I think that for centuries the Catholic Church has presented church history in a manner protective of Mother Church. I have seen more concern on the part of your church for Hindus, Buddhist, and other pagan religions than they do for those who love Jesus Christ as he is presented in the Bible and are committed to making him known to the lost so they will not be left behind. In other words, the Catholic Church is simply wrong and doesn't deserve a fair hearing. LaHaye has not only revealed himself to be an anti-Catholic polemicist, but a theologian with a seriously skewed view of God's salvific work. In a newspaper interview, LaHaye said, we've, himself and Jenkins, created a series of books about the greatest cosmic event that will happen in the history of the world. What is that greatest cosmic event? The incarnation? The cross? The resurrection? No, the rapture. A modern man-made belief based on a distorted Christology and an anemic ecclesiology. But don't the books help people understand the Bible, you ask? According to contemporary Christian music star Michael W. Smith, Left Behind has brought understanding and clarity to the book of Revelation, a book of the Bible usually seen as confusing and dark. This echoes LaHaye's assertion that St. John's Apocalypse gives a detailed description of the future, but a parasol of dispensationalist interpretations of the book of Revelation written over the last several decades suggests otherwise. Dispensationalists disagree about nearly every major element of the book, including the identity of the Whore of Babylon, i.e., the Reformed Roman Empire, the Catholic Church, Iraq, the United States, the mark of the beast, i.e., computer chips, barcodes, social security numbers, and laser technology, and numerous other entities, personages, nations, and events. More importantly, dispensationalists give little attention to the rich Old Testament allusions or the first century context of the book of Revelation. To the contrary, Hale Lindsey proffers in There Is a New World Coming, Vision House 1973, that Revelation is written in such a way that its meaning becomes clear with the unfolding of current world events. Considering that none of Lindsey's interpretations of the book's prophetic utterances has come to pass over the past 30 years, including his conviction that the rapture would occur in the 1980s. That's over 40 years ago. One can only wonder at Lindsey's unflagging confidence. Futurists such as dispensationalists have always been prone to read current events into the book of Revelation's mysterious passages, and prophetic speculators of the past connected it to the French Revolution, the U.S. Civil War, World Wars I and II, and the founding of the modern Israeli state in 1948. More recent events supposedly shedding light on St. John's vision include the Cold War, the Persian Gulf War, and the conflict with terrorism and Saddam Hussein's Iraq. The appeal of the pre tribulational rapture is understandable. The idea that those living today are the generation who will see Christ's return is attractive and intoxicating. My prophetic studies have convinced me, LaHaye writes in Rapture Under Attack, that we Christians living today have more evidence to believe we are the generation of his coming than any generation before us. It's no surprise that many people want to hear that they won't have to die. Such promises of escape from suffering, illness, pain, and potential martyrdom are tempting, but they aren't an option for Catholics. Each of us will endure suffering, and the church will one day have to endure a final great trial. The church will enter the glory of the kingdom only through this final Passover, when she will follow her Lord in his death and resurrection. Catechism of the Catholic Church, number 677. The pre-tribulation rapture, dispensationalism, and the Left Behind book series in the end are long on promises, but short on biblical, patristic, historical, and theological evidence. So I would say that this is mainly boiling on preterism. Now, I want to talk about some of the correct viewpoints in regards to the second coming. So, number one, the time is unknown. Matthew 24:36. Many sects try to predict the coming of Christ, but Jesus says, no one but the Father knows the day and the hour. The sects that try to predict Christ's coming ignore these words in Matthew 24:36. Matthew 24:36. We should also note that Jesus' statement does not mean that Jesus does not know the day of his second coming. We should also note that Jesus' statement does not mean that Jesus does not know the day of his second coming. Jesus does know because he is God. With this statement, Jesus explains that he chose to know by his human knowledge only that which he wanted to know for his mission of salvation. In other words, Jesus could have chosen not to know everything by his own human knowledge, but Jesus knew everything in his human knowledge through his hypostatic union to his eternal logos, his eternal and infinite divine knowledge. Matthew 24:44. Jesus warns us that the Son of Man is coming at an hour we do not expect. Matthew 25:13. Jesus says, "Watch therefore and be prepared, for you know neither the day nor the hour." Mark 13:35 to 37. Jesus says, Watch because you do not know when the master of the house will come. Watch. Luke 12:46. The master will come on a day and at an hour when he is not expected. Acts 1:7. Jesus says it is not for us to know the times or seasons which the Father has fixed by his own authority. 1 Thessalonians 5:2, 1 Thessalonians 5:2, 2 Peter 3:10, Revelations 3:3. The day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. James 5:7. Be patient until the coming of the Lord. Those who try to predict disregard this inspired teaching. Revelations 22:20. Jesus says he is coming soon, but he does not tell us when he is coming. Jesus says he is coming soon, but he does not tell us when he is coming, because Jesus says we do not know the day nor the hour and will be surprised at his coming. It is silly and disobedient for people in groups to predict his coming. We instead need to be about the business of growing in holiness so that we are prepared for our Lord when he comes again, no matter when that will be. All right, and then secondly, I want to talk about the rapture. Basically, it is Zionist Christians who follow the belief in the rapture. And just in case you did not make out what I was talking about in those 5 myths, the people that believe in a rapture, and especially a premillennial dispensationalist rapture, are Zionist Christians. The rapture. 1 Thessalonians 4:16 to 17. Paul writes that we will be caught up in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. So many Protestants call this experience the rapture, even though the word rapture is not found in the Bible, although it is derived from the Latin Vulgate of this verse, rapamer. John 14:3, 1 Corinthians 15:52. These are other passages that Protestants use to support the rapture experience. The question Protestantism has raised is, when will the rapture occur? They have developed 3 theories: 1, post-tribulation; 2, pre-tribulation; and 3, mid-tribulation. We address these theories later on, but first, here is some more background. Revelations 22:3-7-8. John sees the vision of an angel who sees Satan and binds him for a period of 1,000 years. Protestants generally call this period of 1,000 years the millennium. The millennium is a harbinger of the end of the world, and the theories of when the rapture will occur center around this period of time. We should also note that the 1,000 years language is part of apocalyptic literature and should not be interpreted literally. For example, in Psalm 50:10, we see the cattle on 1,000 hills. The word thousand here obviously means a lot of hills. In Daniel 7:10, 1,000 served him. Again, 1,000 means a lot. In 2 Peter 3:8, with God, 1 day is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is 1 day. 1,000 is symbolic for a long time. It is not to be taken literally. There are 3 ways that Protestants interpret the meaning of the 1,000-year millennium, and the interpretation leads to answering when they think the rapture will occur. One is postmillennialism, or preterism. This view interprets the 1,000 years as a very long time. This view also holds that God's kingdom is being advanced in the world by his grace, and the world will eventually be Christianized. Then Christ will return at the close of this period during a time of righteousness and peace. The problem with this view is that the scriptures do not teach that the world will be even relatively Christianized before the second coming. For example, in Matthew 13:24 to 30, 36 to 43, Jesus says that the wicked and the righteous will coexist until the end of the world, when they will be judged and either inherit eternal life or be thrown into eternal fire. Number two, premillennialism, also called millenarianism. Millenarianism. Like postmillennialist, this view also interprets the 1,000 years as a golden age on earth when the world will be Christianized. But they believe that this period will occur after Christ's second coming, during which time Christ will reign physically on earth. They believe the final judgment occurs when the millennium is over, but Scripture does not teach that there is a 1,000 year span between the second coming and final judgment. Instead, Jesus said that when he comes a second time in glory, he will immediately repay every man for what he has done. Matthew chapter 16, verse 27. When Jesus comes, he will separate the sheep from the goats and render judgment. Matthew 25:31 to 46. There is nothing about any period of time between his second coming and final judgment. Number three, amillennialism. This view also interprets the 1,000 years symbolically, but unlike the pre and post views, not has a golden age on earth. This view believes the millennium is the period of Christ's rule in heaven and on earth through his church. This is because the saints who reign with Christ and to whom judgment has been committed are said to be on their thrones in heaven. Revelations 20:4, chief reference for 4:11-16. During this time, Satan is bound and cannot hinder the spread of the gospel. Revelation 23. This is why they explain Jesus teaches the necessity of binding the strong man, Satan, in order to plunder his house and rescue people from his grip. Matthew 12:29. This is also why, after the disciples preached the gospel and rejoiced that the demons were even subject to them, Jesus declared, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Luke 10:18. Nevertheless, during this period, the world will not be entirely Christianized, because Satan, though bound, is still in some sense able to prowl around and attack souls. Chief reference 1 Peter 5:8. Of the three, this position is most consistent with Catholic teaching. The pre and post millennium views have been rejected by the Church. 2 Thessalonians 2:1-4. Concerning the second coming of Christ, Scripture teaches, and most Protestants believe, that Christ's coming will be preceded by a time of rebellion, lawlessness, and persecution. Protestants often refer to this period as the tribulation. Although the word tribulation cannot be found in the Scripture passages Protestants use to support the rapture. So the question is, when will the 1 Thessalonians 4:16-17 rapture occur in light of the tribulation and Christ's second coming? Here are the three theories previously mentioned. The post-tribulation view, this view holds that the rapture will occur right after the tribulation and immediately before the second coming of Christ. This view can be consistent with Scripture and Catholic teaching to the extent it holds that the rapture and Christ's second coming occur together after the tribulation and the church militant on earth. See, for example, Matthew 24:29 to 31, Mark 13:24 to 27, 2 Thessalonians 1:1 to 12. Pre-tribulational view. This view holds that the rapture will occur before the tribulation. The problem with this view is that it requires three comings of Christ. First, when he was born in Bethlehem. Second, when he returns for the rapture before the tribulation. Third, when he returns at the end of the tribulation and establishes the millennium. Scripture rejects three comings of Christ. In Hebrews chapter 10 verse 28, it is clear that Christ will appear at a second and final time, when he comes in glory to save us. This view is inconsistent with Matthew 24:24 to 31, Mark 13:24 to 27, and 2 Thessalonians 2:1 to 12, where the rapture and the second coming occur together. The mid-tribulational view. This view holds that the rapture will occur during the middle of the tribulation. The problem with this view is that it also requires three comings of Christ. First, when he was born in Bethlehem. Second, when he returns for the rapture during the middle of the tribulation. And third, when he returns at the end of the tribulation and establishes the millennium. As seen in Hebrews chapter 9 verse 28, Scripture rejects the three comings of Christ. The view is also inconsistent with Matthew 24:24 to 31, Mark 13:24 to 27, and 2 Thessalonians 2:1 to 12. 2 Peter chapter 3 verses 8 to 15, instead of worrying about when the rapture will occur, Christians should follow Peter's instruction to repent of their sins, live lives of holiness and godliness, be zealous and at peace, and wait for the Lord's coming with forbearance and joy. And so, on that final note, in passing, I just want to say that when it comes to the book of Daniel, you have to understand that a lot of it is written in allegory, and it is not to be taken literally. The fourth kingdom of the statue in the dream of Nebuchadnezzar is not Rome, it is Greece. Media and Persia were two completely separate kingdoms. The gold represents Babylon, the silver Media, the lead represents Persia, and the iron represents Greece. The four parts represent the four generals dividing Alexander the Great's empire. Rome is not even mentioned once in the book of Daniel. When it comes to the book of Revelation, again, it is written in the context of what was going on in the first century and the very beginning of the second century of the Common Era. It has little or nothing to do with stuff that is happening now in the 21st century. Generally, it is talking about the churches and what will happen to the church. It is to be taken poetically and figuratively. Yes, there probably is vivid, actual historicist depictions going on in Revelations and in Daniel, but you cannot take all of it literal. You cannot follow it literal. And the pre-millennial dispensationalist rapture is nonsense. The word rapture is not mentioned once in the Bible. It has a Latin origin, but it does not have neither a Greek nor a Hebrew origin to the word rapture. Amillennialism would fit most consistently with the Catholic Church. I don't know what the Orthodox Church teaches. I assume that with the Orthodox, they also reject pre and post millennialism as well as dispensationalism. The rapture is nowhere to be found in Revelation. Complete nonsense. And the evangelist and the fundamentalist who follow this are typically Zionist Christians. Jesus did establish an earthly kingdom in his first coming in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The church replaced old Israel and became the new Israel. The Gentiles and the Jews that accepted the grace of Christ's atonement on the cross are the people of the new covenant. The church replaced ancient Israel entirely. And after that point, the Jews have virtually nothing whatsoever to do with the divine imminence and coming forth of revelation of the Most High. And then finally, as I have explained, there is no way to prove when the second coming is going to happen. And there is only going to be two comings of Christ. And Christ is not going to come before the tribulation or in the middle of the tribulation. In fact, the word tribulation is not in Revelations anywhere. There is no way to know when Christ is going to come back. There is not going to be a pre-tribulation or a post-tribulation rapture. However, there will be a great persecution of the church. And so, on that note, I hope that I was able to make a huge contribution to people in this stream at explaining what these prophecies actually mean. I know that this was actually going to be very important to explain to people, so I went ahead and did that. All right, so Interdimensional Lizard says morning. Good morning, Lizard. Soulbreaker says hail. Hello. Hello there. Soulbreaker says, can you mod my second channel just in case? Soulbreaker 2 says hi. Soulbreaker 2 says second. Soulbreaker 2 says win. TCFT says welcome to Big Banks from Big Bangers, Little Lord Lazarus Iscariot Jr. 9. Yeah, could you please not spam my chat? I would like people to be on topic in regards to what I like people in my chat to remain on topic. Soulbreaker says burgers. Soulbreaker says win. Again, I would like it if people would try to stay on topic when I am discussing things. Code of Truth asks, do you practice semen retention at Imperator Forge? Goat Corpse asks, why do they use the Comedy Central logo, LOL? What? Oh, on that site. That's a good question, Goat Corpse. I'm not for sure. I'm not for sure. I think the C represents Catholic theology or something, whereas for Comedy Central, the C represents comedy. I don't know, man. You know, honestly, there's so much trademark copyright shit, and I don't know much about the trademark genre stuff, but I don't know. Goat Corpse That's kind of epic. Goat Corpse says, good question, BTW Chan. Have you been jelking? What? What, dude? Yeah. You see, um, this is just not going to work, man. Questions like this, like for the last 2 hours and 20 minutes, I have been talking about freaking prophecies out of Daniel and Revelation and how the people that lived in those times, namely the 3rd century BC and the 1st century AD, and you guys are just mentally masturbating in the chat here. Like, this is not how to run a chat. This is Mormon Shaggy tier chat stuff, okay? Okay, I'm not drunken surfer, all right? I'm not going to laugh at gay jokes. All right, so Imbertellen spams my chat. So again, I just want to say, I want to reiterate, please remain on topic. The chat is not a place where you can go to have a free for all. Okay? It's not your chat, it's mine. This is my channel, this is my stream, and this is my chat. And in general, when I'm trying to do long presentations like this, I generally would prefer if people would stay on topic and not mentally masturbate in the chat. So, again, if this keeps up, I'm going to have to probably set options for blocking out spam. I don't want to do that, and I'm not planning to do that, but if it is necessary and I find that it's better to have an anti-spam block setting in my chat, I'm going to do that. So you got to ask better questions than this. This has nothing at all to do. Questions like this have nothing whatsoever to do with what I'm talking about. This right here is also another example, okay? And these are fucking mods in my chat that are doing this. So I would like to please ask the chat or people watching me in chat to please remain on topic and to ask questions that pertain to what is going on in the stream. I don't think it's quite that difficult to do that. I don't think it's that hard to do. So, on that note, are there any questions pertaining to the stream? Any questions pertaining to New Testament theology, New Testament theological and prophetic interpretations? I don't see anything going on, so that's going to be it. This has been Imperator of Forge. This is Forge Gang Radio, and I am still a hard man. Stay hard. Stay forging. Please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this. And so next time, I'm going to go back a few centuries. I'm going to talk about the ancient Celts of Europe, the ancient Celts, and what life was like with them. Next time.